The Invisible Man was written in 1897 by an English novelist, H.G. Wells. He lived between 1866 and 1946. Wells is better known for his science fiction novels, such as The Time Machine, The Invisible Man, and War of the Worlds. The Invisible Man has been made into films and TV serials. A young scientist discovers a way to invisibility and gets trapped in the hell of his own experiments, remaining clueless about a way to reverse the results. The story shows the destructive effects of a strange discovery, that is, invisibility, on the scientist himself and the society in general. This story is a symbolic expression of the ideas and fears of the author H.G. Wells' time and our own time. Nevertheless, and all times as long as mindless inventions and discoveries will threaten the peace and tranquility of society. The novel gradually unveils a great scientific mystery that a stranger carries on a snowy day to the village of Epping in England, and a myriad stories float around, bandaged and overcovered as he is. A stranger came early in February through a biting wind and a driving snow into the Coach and Horses, walking from Bramblehurst railway station, and demanded, "In the name of human charity, a room and a fire." A guest stopping at Epping village in the winter time was an unheard of piece of luck, and so Mrs. Hall, the owner of the inn, without taking his identity, allotted him a parlor and carried the clothes, plates, and glasses into it. She was surprised to see that her visitor still wore his hat and coat, despite that the fire was burning up briskly in the room, and that his head and face were thoroughly bandaged.
"Can I take your hat and coat, sir, and give them a good dry in the kitchen?"
"No, I prefer to keep them on."
"Very well, sir. As you like. In a bit the room will be warmer. Your lunch is served, sir."
"Thank you."
When Mrs. Hall came again in the room with a mustard pot, the stranger was eating, and his overcoat and hat had been taken off and put over a chair in front of the fire.
"I suppose I may have them to dry now."
"Leave the hat."
"I didn't know, sir, that..."
"Thank you."
"The poor souls had an accident or an operation or something."
Mrs. Hall once again went to the parlor when the clock jobber, Teddy Henfrey, came to the inn.
"Would you mind, sir, this man coming to look at the clock, sir?"
Look at the clock? Certainly. Good afternoon.
I hope that it's no intrusion.
None whatever. Though I understand that this room is really to be mine for my own private use.
"I thought, sir, you'd prefer the clock."
Certainly. But as a rule, I like to be alone and undisturbed. But I'm really glad to have the clock seen to. Yeah, very glad.
The weather...
Why don't you finish and go? All you've got to do is to fix the hour hand on its axle. You're simply humbugging.
Certainly, sir. 1 minute more. I overlooked...
Mr. Henfrey finished and went, but he went feeling excessively annoyed. Mr. Hall on the road. Mr. Hall drove the Epping conveyance when occasional people required it to Sidderbridge Junction.
Damn it. A man must do a clock at times, surely. Can't a man look at you? Ugly. Seemingly can't if the police was wanting you. You couldn't be more wrapped and bandaged. My sakes, Mr. Hall. You got a rum up home?
What's that?
Rum-looking customer stopping at a coach and horses. It looks a bit like a disguise, don't it? I would like to see a man's face if I had him stopping in my place. But women are that trustful, where strangers are concerned. He's took your rooms, and he ain't even given a name, Hall.
You don't say so.
He's got a lot of luggage coming tomorrow, so he says.
What?
My aunt at Hastings was swindled by a stranger in the like manner.
The seeds of suspicion were sown perfectly in Mr. Hall's mind by Mr. Henfrey. However, Mr. Hall only dared to say when retiring for the night to Mrs. Hall.
Look very closely at the stranger's luggage when it comes tomorrow.
You mind your own business, Hall, and I'll mind mine.
The stranger's cartload of trunks, crates, and boxes arrives finally. The stranger comes out to receive it, but a mishap happens.
Come along with those boxes. I've been waiting long enough.
What?
Lie down!
The kind-hearted Mr. Hall, on seeing the stranger attacked by the dog, went headlong, following him to his room, and finding the doors ajar, entered it without ceremony. He caught a glimpse of what seemed a handless sleeve waving towards him in the dim light, and he saw a face of 3 huge, indeterminate spots on white, like a pale pansy flower. Then he was struck violently in the chest, hurled back, and the door slammed in his face and locked. Griffin had unpacked his crates and boxes and spread his bottles of all sizes all over the place, on the table and the floor. And when Mrs. Hall pointed to the mess he had created, he suggested the compensation could be charged in his bill.
Oh my God! Oh my God, what a mess! You have spoiled the place.
Don't worry. You can charge me a shilling each time you find such a mess.
The stranger worked very fitfully. On other times, he would rise late and while away his time pacing in the room, fretting audibly and sleeping in the armchair by the fire. He communicated with none and rarely went abroad by daylight. At twilight, he would go out muffled up invisibly and appear suddenly, giving a scare to men and children. When people talked about him, Mrs. Hall explained him as an experimental investigator, while others suspected him to be a criminal trying to escape from justice. Yet others felt that he was rather a harmless lunatic. Later, some supernatural stories were also floated. When the word reached the village general practitioner, Cuss, that the stranger possessed 1,001 bottles of rare chemical, he felt jealous of the stranger and went to interview him.
I've heard you take an interest in scientific things. We are raising funds for the village nurse. Would you subscribe?
I'd consider it.
Are you researching?
I am.
A long research?
A damnable long research.
Oh, you must have been given permission. Most valuable prescription?
Yes.
Is it medical?
Damn you. What are you fishing after?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you.
Look, here it is. I'd read it. 5 ingredients. Put it down.
was a prescription burning, wasn't it? How the devil can you move an empty sleeve like that?
Empty sleeve?
Yes, an empty sleeve.
It's an empty sleeve, is it? You saw it was an empty sleeve. Are you sure? Think again.
After this strange experience, Cuss was not in a condition to stay there any further. He rushed straight to the vicarage where the village vicar, Bunting, lived. When he narrated the entire story, and then something from the sleeve pinched his nose as if between the thumb and the forefinger, the vicar laughed heartily and called it a very strange story. It was not easy to convince anyone that Cuss had seen a man whose hand was invisible. Let's see in other modules how the truth of the stranger reveals gradually on other people in the village of Ipping, and how things get complex and complex.